For decades, Atlantic Canada has depended on imported energy. Oil, natural gas, even coal has been shipped here from elsewhere to power our homes, our industries, and our economy. But now we have a chance to flip the script, to become an energy exporter. While we already export some crude oil from offshore Newfoundland to Europe and the US, there's something else, something that's abundant, something that's renewable, that could be our next big energy export. And that's the wind. Not wind itself, but something made from wind. Some of the strongest, most reliable wind resources in the world are right here in Atlantic Canada. And that wind can be converted into green hydrogen, a fuel that countries like Germany see as essential for their energy transition and also for energy security. Demand for green hydrogen in Western Europe is growing. Governments are setting ambitious emission reduction and renewable energy targets, and industries are looking for reliable, large-scale hydrogen suppliers. That's why a wave of green hydrogen projects have been proposed across Atlantic Canada, projects that could turn our region into a global leader in green energy. But potential doesn't guarantee success. For green hydrogen to take off, the economics have to work, both for hydrogen producers in Atlantic Canada and also for buyers in Europe. Infrastructure, investment, regulations, policies, and buyers all need to align before the first shipments leave for Europe. So what will it take to close the gap between the ambitions of hydrogen project developers in Atlantic Canada and commitments from European buyers for enough green hydrogen to make these projects viable? To help us answer that big question, I'm joined today on our first transatlantic episode of Atlantic Canada's Hydrogen Journey by Trent Vichie here in Canada and by Lukas Schuffelen in Germany. Trent is the founder and CEO of EverWind Fuels. He is leading one of Atlantic Canada's largest green hydrogen export projects located in Point Tupper, Nova Scotia. Lukas is a partner at BET Energy Consulting in Germany, specializing in hydrogen policy, energy markets, and supply contracts. He has deep insight into Europe's demand for green hydrogen. And if you want to go deeper on Atlantic Canada's hydrogen export opportunity, check out the Hydrogen East Conference happening in Halifax on April 14th and 15th alongside the Smart Energy Conference. I'll put the registration link in the show notes. Trent and Lukas, welcome to the podcast. To start, Trent, can you tell us how you came to be the founder and CEO of EverWind Fuels?
Sure. I've been investing in infrastructure for the last 30 years, and I saw the gap between renewable power, which was becoming cheaper, and an opportunity to capture it with hydrogen. So when I looked at Atlantic Canada as an obvious place that had wind and the space to actually build it, and then acquired the Point Tupper terminal. It's so much easier to develop these projects when you have an existing base of operations, and the Point Tupper terminal is unbelievable on that front.
Thanks, Trent. Lukas, tell us a little bit about your interest in green hydrogen markets in Europe and also here in Atlantic Canada.
Yeah, I'm responsible at BT for our consulting services for the industrial clients. And while those are also pushing for efficiency and electrification within decarbonization efforts, it got more and more clear that molecules will remain necessary in the overall picture and transition. And that being said, in such a hybrid world with electrons and molecules, decarbonized molecules are a key element. And from an economical perspective, hydrogen is probably the molecule of choice that we see as a solution in the future. And and then it was more or less connections that I had the chance to join a delegation to come to Canada, organized by the federal ministries of state from Germany and Canada, to exchange with experts in Halifax, and which is where we met Derek. And that's when and where I understood that Canada will be part of our German green molecule solution.
Great. Thanks, Lukas. Trent, your project in Nova Scotia could be the largest hydrogen export project in Atlantic Canada. But there are likely easier places than Atlantic Canada to build energy infrastructure. So tell us a little bit about why here, or what makes Atlantic Canada the right place to produce green hydrogen at scale.
Yeah, look, there are tough, people say Atlantic Canada is a tough place to do business, but there are tougher places. Like Canada is a developed economy, and it's a lot harder to develop in, emerging economies. Really, it came down to sort of the wind resource, developed economy. Also, it's going to emerge, production is going to emerge globally. If you think about things like marine shipping, you need local supply sources. So it was obvious that it was going to be one of the winners, or one of the obvious places to produce. The site itself that we purchased is unbelievable. It's got the deepest ice-free berth on the East Coast. It's got road, rail, airport, and it has more than 130 people operating at the site. That is a huge advantage in terms of costs, both avoided capex and operational costs. So it was a combination of all of those things that makes me think that Atlantic Canada is a great place to produce green hydrogen.
On our first episode of the podcast, Dave McGregor said that yours may be the most advanced green hydrogen project in North America. So I'm interested to know, where are you in the development process now, and what are the next big milestones going to be?
Yeah, so we've spent the last 3 years developing the project, and in order to develop, so we have 17 Met towers up. We spent the last 3 years developing out the feedstock, which is the renewable power, hundreds of thousands of hours of field studies, etc. We have 600 megawatts of renewable power ready to go, and we're developing the second phase of our project. Last spring, we completed FEED, which was 100,000 hours. We're actually tweaking that at the moment in terms of making it more efficient. One of the things that we've been saying, and we're seeing now, is that technology will improve. So sitting here today, the next steps are getting to FID on the wind, and then doing some tweaks to our engineering, and then completing offtake. So we're really about driving down the costs, and we've spent 200 million Canadian to date developing the project. We have a huge team, and it takes a huge amount of work to pull it together, but we're progressing well.
So you talked about offtake, so maybe this is a good time to bring Lukas into the conversation. So when you're looking for offtake, you're looking over to Europe and probably Germany specifically for customers. So Lukas, you work with European industries that are looking for green hydrogen. Why are these customers in Germany, or industries in Germany, interested in Canadian hydrogen?
Yeah, let's say comparably to or in difference more or less to Canada, Germany has not the best geographic conditions to produce. Meanwhile, we want to transition and are ramping up demand side more or less as a first mover, I would say, on scale at least. While there will be also production capacity in Germany coming up and is currently built, we will additionally need volumes to come from outside. That being said, the European hydrogen backbone won't be fully ready until 2030 plus. So there will also need to come imports from out of Europe to the harbor infrastructure in Netherlands and or Germany. And that will probably bridge at least our need in the early years, at least, to get it rolling for us.
Okay. And what do you think gives Atlantic Canada a competitive advantage over some other global players in green hydrogen exports?
Yeah. Honestly, obviously, it is a price-sensitive discussion, and as Trent rightfully said, and I looked at it as well, being in Halifax and Nova Scotia, it's good wind conditions over there that drive down LCOH and make it more attractive. Besides transport costs, to generate hydrogen or produce hydrogen over at your place in Canada, and to ship it to Central Western Europe. And further, you have an interest in establishing such a hydrogen economy in Canada now, and are also willing to move now, which is not the case in all of Europe or globally. And as we can see today and hear from Trent, they are willing to get it rolling. And with your government also backing that first steps that are necessary and need to be funded to some extent as a first mover, that is a clear fit for us.
So we've heard all the good news that, Trent, everyone wants to produce green hydrogen. Customers in Germany or industries in Germany are interested in buying it. So Trent, what do you think the biggest unsolved problem is today that's getting in the way of making green hydrogen exports to Europe a reality? Like, is it infrastructure or subsidies or policy or buyers, or maybe it's some combination of all of those?
It's a combination of all. It's a combination of all of them, and so we've made a lot of progress in the last 3 years. So Canada has passed ITC tax credits, which is huge. Local governments in places like Nova Scotia and Newfoundland have progressed their policies and done an amazing job to promote the industry. But some of it is getting equipment manufacturers up and running and delivering efficiently. It's the receiving infrastructure to receive the product, which is coming along in real time at the moment. Policy as well. So, and policy and price are not unrelated. Europe has a huge stated demand for hydrogen, but not at any price. And so I think that what's happened is you've seen a stated demand for a lot. And then when you try and ramp up an industry from scratch, you're looking at prices that aren't sort of where they're going to be over time. And so there's a little bit of a put and take in terms of how that's playing out. But you're seeing contracts being signed today. So like in the last few months, you've actually seen refineries signing up for domestically produced European hydrogen. And you're starting to see auctions happening for imported. So you've seen 2 H2 Global auctions already. So it is actually ramping up. Nothing ever happens in a straight line. It always starts with small pieces and then it ramps up like an S-curve.
Oh, that's encouraging. So Lukas, when people think about hydrogen, they might imagine, cars running on fuel cells, but that's likely not where most of the hydrogen is going to go. So from a European perspective, can you tell us where or what green hydrogen is most likely to be used for in Germany or other parts of Western Europe?
Yeah, I don't see cars running on fuel cells in the next decade or so. It will probably be a combination of normal cars and e-mobility. But as Trent rightfully said, currently there's movement coming from refineries and especially the industry sector that within the sectors that need to move or got funding to move. Furthermore, it's probably SAF for aviation. That is also, from a regulatory point of view, the stick that needs to be done. So there's, let's say, a must from regulatory point of view in several sectors. Potentially, I see heavy truck mobility in the mid-term to become a topic. There's interesting infos coming up from time to time. And later on, potentially for energy sector, but I fear competitiveness won't enable usage in, for example, combined heat and power generation units, as long as natural gas plus ETS is the cheaper solution. Therefore, this is more or less the picture for the end 30s, mid to end 30s earliest.
Okay. So we've talked about supply, we've talked about demand. You've kind of, in a roundabout way, talked about this sort of price gap between what what the cost to produce hydrogen is and the price that buyers may be willing to pay. So I have a question for both of you. Last year, Canada and Germany committed a total of $600 million to support a green hydrogen auction to help close this anticipated gap between the cost to produce green hydrogen in Atlantic Canada and the price that buyers in Germany would be willing to pay. So this hydrogen auction is meant to kickstart the industry, but will it be enough? So Lukas, maybe tell us a bit about the auction and how it's going to work.
Yeah, H2 Global is a two-sided auction, which is based on the idea that an intermediary, Hindco, enters into a contract with sellers in the early stages of a market development. This Hindco purchases hydrogen in an auction to the lowest bids until the backing funding volume is gone. So you can imagine a merit order of volume and price for that. The successful bidders get a 10-year contract for the price and volume they offered. So the volume and the 600 million are gone. This gathered volume of hydrogen is then later on sold by Hindco to end customers, so the industry sector, for example, in also an auction-based mechanism. Here it is vice versa, and the highest bids are successful until the contracted volume is gone again. And for the industry sector, it's short-term as well as long-term contracts, which is currently still pending how they will do it. And it is evaluated how the mechanism will work in detail, because both sides have their good and bad thing. Long-term contracts are good to have a stable and plannable future, but short-term contracts get updated signals how the price development from an industry perspective is.
This auction was announced last year, and I can imagine that's very complicated. You've got both, the supply and demand side. When do you think the auction's actually going to get started?
Yeah, currently there are 5 auctions open from H2 Global or Hindco, and 2 of them Canadians are able to participate. This is a North American one and a global one. The specific Canadian one that you refer to is still open when it will be published and announced. There I need to say I have no further information when will they do so. I will hope as soon as possible, but nevertheless, now there's 2 opportunities currently ongoing on H2 Global for Canada.
Okay. Trent, when these auctions happen, do you think that they will be enough to get at least a few green hydrogen projects in Atlantic Canada off the ground?
I think certainly, hopefully more than one, but certainly there should be enough there for at least one to get going, and hopefully more. In terms of where we're seeing sort of production prices and people's willingness to pay, it does close that gap. So it should result in projects getting off the ground.
Okay.
Yeah, but Trent, you would probably agree that the 500 million in the North American one or the 600 million in the Canadian one each will account for 1 to 2 projects that get through. So
correct.
First steps are possible, but nevertheless, I would totally agree with you that to get it rolling into a really economy, further funding needs to be done to bridge the next steps as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I also think that, to talk about our project, getting the first phase of our project up and running is good. But what that does is actually it brings economies of scale for future phases. So, we're developing our project so that the cost of what we can produce comes down over time. And we're seeing that both in equipment, the efficiency of delivering that equipment to the site, and also just from scale of operations. So like hopefully, well, like where we're trying to drive it to is to make green competitive with grey, and ultimately that will depend on the price of natural gas. But I mean that is quite variable, and I'm optimistic that you can bring that down to a lot more than where initial pricing indications are. It's just a function of we're seeing more efficient technology, smaller footprints for plants, and I would say smarter integration between renewables and that production.
I'd like to end this episode with a couple of provocative what-if scenario questions. So I'll start with you, Lukas. If you imagine it's 10 years from now, it's 2035, and green hydrogen never took off in Atlantic Canada, what do you think would have happened or not happened to cause it not to take off? What do you think the sort of fatal flaw would have been?
Yeah, I would say funding to kick things off has not been sufficient. When you, as we just discussed, if you transfer the current funding potential coming via H2 Global for Canada, it will be only enough for a few projects. If Canada wants to push, like you said in the beginning, into this direction of being an H2 export nation, further additional funding should be made available to really boost it up and ramp it up, and to lower necessary cost, or to lower the cost, as Trent rightfully said. Then you have economies of scale, you have more experience, you push up efficiency, you allow for a better utilization of infrastructure, for example, also in shipping and harbor infrastructure, etc. So there's really a couple of things that you can get more efficient when you have a couple of more projects to push down overall costs for hydrogen in the next steps. And yeah, it is a new technology, more or less. So there is the need to get it done from a funding perspective, to get the first dominoes falling. And then if it's done, then I guess I'm totally with Trent. Then the prices will be competitive, and no further spending will be needed.
Okay. Trent, I'll give you the last word. I know you and EverWind are anxious to get going. So if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing to make the green hydrogen export opportunity happen faster, what would it be?
I think it's a bilateral deal. I mean, the Europeans are actually building projects of national significance where they've picked them. That would be it, doing it on a bilateral basis, and getting a project or two up and running, because I think sometimes we let perfect be the enemy of the good, and honestly, that's would be my one wish. I'd probably add one last thing, is that production of green molecules and export to Europe, yes, but you're seeing some of that actually emerge into the Canadian economy as well. So it's not just a straight export of energy; it will be, domestic use of those molecules as they go forward. So it's I think we're seeing that more and more.
Okay. Well, thanks, Trent. Thank you, Lukas. This has been a really interesting discussion, and encourage our listeners to join us next week for the next episode of Atlantic Canada's Hydrogen Journey.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derek.
You're welcome. I thought that was a really fascinating conversation, with Trent representing the project developers who want to produce and export green hydrogen, and Lukas, speaking for the potential buyers in Europe. And while the opportunity they talked about was the same, I thought that their perspectives in some areas were really quite different. Maria, what stood out for you from this week's episode?
Well, what struck me was what producers and buyers want and what they actually need. Western Europe wants green hydrogen, and that's essential for their energy transition. And Atlantic Canada, we want to sell it to them, but wanting isn't enough. For this to work, hydrogen producers need to price high enough to make their projects viable, and buyers need a price that's low enough to justify switching from fossil fuels to hydrogen. So that's the real challenge. And also, I have a better appreciation of why Germany wants to import green hydrogen instead of producing it themselves. I mean, unlike Atlantic Canada, Germany doesn't have the land available that we have, and they certainly don't have the wind resources either. And those are both needed to develop green hydrogen at scale. And until the hydrogen, backbone, which is in Europe, they're creating a pipeline infrastructure. When that infrastructure is built, in the early 2030s, most of their hydrogen in the meantime will have to arrive by ship to European ports.
Wow. Thanks, Maria. For me, I thought Trent made a pretty strong case for why Atlantic Canada is well positioned to become a leader in hydrogen exports, and also why EverWind's project specifically makes sense. It has the deepest ice-free port on the East Coast. It's already connected to shipping and road and rail infrastructure, and they already have about 600 megawatts of wind power lined up. Plus, Trent said that electrolyzer technology is rapidly improving, and everyone has already invested about $200 million in their project, so they're pretty serious about this. My other big takeaway, or at least my kind of understanding, is I think I finally have an understanding of how this two-sided auction process is going to work. That will have Canadian hydrogen producers that bid the lowest prices will secure 10-year contracts to sell hydrogen to an intermediary company who will then take that hydrogen and sell it to the German buyers who bid the highest price. And the $600 million subsidy that's being provided by Canada and Germany will be used to bridge the anticipated gap between the price that producers need and the price that buyers are willing to pay. I think the big question, though, is how much green hydrogen volume will this actually bring to market? Trent and Lukas both agreed that the upcoming auctions that the Canadian hydrogen producers can participate in should be enough to get 2 or maybe 3 projects off the ground, and that should be enough to kickstart the sector here. But long term, Lukas and Trent both said that more funding is going to be needed to scale up production and to drive down costs. And if Atlantic Canada wants to become a leader in green hydrogen over the long term, we really need economies of scale.
Well, that's very interesting. I never knew that the electrolysis technology is getting better and better all the time. For listeners and watchers who are out there following us along and you're curious about Atlantic Canada's hydrogen future, make sure you can attend or register for the Hydrogen East conference that's taking place at the Halifax Convention Centre on April 14th and 15th, so it's coming up soon. It's happening alongside the Smart Energy Halifax event. And we will put the registration link in the show notes below. And Derek, thank you so much for having wonderful guests on today's episode, and thanks for hosting today.
Thanks, Maria. We'll talk again next week.